We keep the stories by giving the stories to people who take them and give them again. In the circle of tellers, the circle of listeners, who become the tellers of stories that circle the heart like old friends.
Back in my college days, I used to go drinking with an Irish buddy, Jack. One night we pulled into a popular watering hole, couldn't find a parking place. Jack says, Lord, help us find a parking place and I will quit drinking and chasing wild women forever. The next moment a car pulled out and we got a spot right in the front row. Jack says, hey Lord, never mind, I found one myself.
The head of the delegation trying to get a key political appointee was frustrated because the president would not make a decision. So finally the president said, I've made up my mind. No, he does not get the job. Well, why? Why does he get the job? He's a staunch member of the party. And the president said, I don't like the looks of his face. But Mr. President, you can't just deny a job because somebody don't like the looks of their face. They're not responsible for the look of their face. And Abraham Lincoln said, that's where you're wrong. Every man over 45 is responsible for the look on their face.
There once was a very holy man in Sodom, and when disaster would threaten the people, he would go to the forest and he would light a fire in this special clearing and he would say a prayer and the disaster would be averted. His disciple didn't know the prayer, but he went to the forest and he told the Lord, I will light the fire and that must be enough. And it was. And his disciple said, when disaster threatened, Lord, I don't know where the clearing is, and I don't know where the prayer is, but I will tell the story, and that will have to be enough. And it was.
Now, Jack and Tom and Will were herding turkeys up the Wilderness Road from Berryville up to Springfield, and they were about to run out of something to eat, so they stopped at this cabin. Old boy was stirring up beans, and he said, you know, I've got about enough for me and maybe one other person. Why don't you boys think about it? So they said they'd just spend the night in the barn. Next morning they'd have an answer which of the three of them would get the rest of the beans. When they got up, Tom was oldest, said, I'm the oldest and the biggest and the strongest. I need those beans. Will says, well, you know, I'm the middle son. I've always been treated in between, so I probably deserve those beans. Jack says, well, you know, I went to sleep and had a dream, and in that dream, that old boy that looks a lot like you came out and said to me, you're the youngest and kind of spindly. You better get up and eat those beans now. So Jack did in the middle of the night. He said, it pays to follow your dreams.
One day there were two frogs sitting on lily pads in a pond, and it started to rain, a cold rain. And the frogs looked at each other and they said, we don't want to get wet in this rain. What can we do to get out of it? And they looked at each other, they read each other's mind, and simultaneously both frogs jumped off those lily pads down into the pond to get out of the rain so they wouldn't get wet.
He had spent a year and a day with Truth. Truth was old and wrinkled and ugly. And as he left, Truth said to him, when you speak of me, and you will, tell them that I am young and beautiful, because Truth likes a good story.
Two blind skunks lived in a den. One was named Out, the other In. When Out was out, In was in. When Out was in was out. One day when Out was in, he noticed that In was in. How do you know? Instinct.
Boston Daniels was
the first African-American police chief in a city over 100,000, Kansas City, Kansas. He was an elegant gentleman. Some said he dressed like a turn of the century New Orleans pimp. But he always wore a cutaway jacket, brocade vest. He had a bowler hat. One afternoon, he was getting his hair cut. And one of his minions came around and he said, "Chief, we just got a call from Kansas City, Missouri, and there is a dead body on our side of James Street," which is the border down there. And he looked at it, he said, "They're lying." "How do you know they're lying?" "We put the body on the other side about 6 o'clock this morning."
We keep the stories by giving the stories to people who take them and give them again. In the circle of tellers, circle of listeners who become the tellers of stories that circle the heart like old friends.